British polity is concerned, Rupert Murdoch was the devil in that. To come to an accommodation with him meant sacrificing all the principles the Labour Party stood for.
The Labour Party I had joined as a 13-year-old was, as it says on the tin, a party of the working class. It prided itself on its internal democracy, with members having the right to vote on policy. But under the banner of what they called New Labour and I called non-Labour, Blair and his clique began to steer the party into the eager embrace of Thatcherism, dragging a left-wing party into the footsteps of the Iron Lady would require an iron fist. For Blair, democracy was so overrated.
What we see developing very early in the Blair administration is the kind of tactics that one associates with emperors or rulers of one sort or another who are non-democratic.
They sort of just had a party in which dissent really wasn't tolerated.
No decisions were made in the cabinet. It didn't operate as a cabinet in the way that constitutional theory says it should. People would turn up and it was a sort of little chat. If there was ever anything coming up that he thought you might want to argue about, he'd ask to see you beforehand and try and iron it out. He didn't want any clashing or discussion of ideas and a kind of collective thrashing out of a line. I mean, it just didn't happen.
Blair had this presidential manner. He ruled by, sofa politics. You picture him and Alistair Campbell leaning back and sort of, feet up on the desk, deciding the fate of the nation.
The appointment of Alistair Campbell was an acceptance of the brutality and bullying culture that is endemic in Westminster. If Tony didn't want to see you and if you were shown in to see Alistair Campbell, you were going to get a rollicking.
You're going to get monstered.
You were going to get monstered.
Campbell was there with Blair, and he was like the hard guy. Tony was Mr. Charm. Campbell could be rude and rough and swear, and so they were like a duo, Mr. Tough and Mr. Nice, but shoulder to shoulder.
Not only were Mandelson and Campbell the pillars who supported Blair and did all his enforcing and his fixing, but they were often used as lightning rods.
Yes.
When things happened, when it was clearly Blair had done something appalling or wrong or stupid, they would step forward and take all the lightning for him and protect him. He was very well protected.
Surrounded by sycophants and slippery by nature, Blair soon earned the nickname Teflon Tony, because dirt never stuck to him.
There is a remarkable quote in Chris Mullin's diary of Blair giving advice to David Miliband about how to conduct himself in public office. He says, smile at everybody and get somebody else to stab their back.
We will be tough on sleaze and tough on the causes of sleaze.
Less than 6 months after becoming Prime Minister, Blair was caught up in a corruption scandal that would have ended most politicians' careers. His government had announced plans to ban tobacco advertising from sport. But what we didn't know was that before coming to power, he had accepted a £1 million donation from Bernie Ecclestone, owner of Formula One. Ecclestone then secretly visited Blair in Downing Street as the decision was being made.
Do you give a donation expecting something in return?
No, I didn't want anything. I still don't want anything, to be honest.
Within hours of the meeting, Blair had ordered his minions to grant Formula One a special exemption from the ban. His health secretary protested, saying the U-turn would result in serious damage to the government. Blair simply overruled him, and Bernie Ecclestone's Formula One continued to peddle tobacco.
The Eccleston affair should have been the moment that we in the press, and indeed the nation, saw through Mr. Blair. He was caught red-handed trading policy in return for hard cash from a businessman.
Blair's backroom bullying remained secret for another decade, allowing our new Prime Minister to wriggle free from the scandal with this priceless apology to the nation.
I would never do anything either to harm the country or anything proper. I never have. I think most people who have dealt with me think I'm a pretty straight sort of guy, and I am.
Just as people hoped for an end to Tory sleaze under New Labour, they also hoped Britain would play a decent role in the world.
The Labour government does not accept that political values can be left behind when we check in our passports to travel on diplomatic business. Our foreign policy must have an ethical dimension.
Whatever his party wanted, when it came to hawking weapons around the world, Blair took his cue from Mrs. Thatcher.
Aircraft are very expensive these days, and so you don't want them to have just one role when that one role is advanced training. So they also are being adapted for a strike capacity, a ground strike capacity, which is why you've got these on. So they're very good not only for advanced training, but for striking.
From day one, Blair cozied up to Britain's biggest weapons dealer, BAE Systems, and its chief executive, Dick Evans. A year into government, Blair yet again overruled his cabinet to rubber stamp BAE's sale of Hawk jets to Indonesia's dictatorship, which was ethnically cleansing thousands in East Timor.
This was Blair sending out a plain message saying, you can say what you want about ethical foreign policy, but I'm in charge of this government.
Yes.
And, you know, if we want to sell planes to dictators to bomb their civilian populations, we're going to do so.
The state of Africa is a scar on the conscience of the world.
That was almost Oscar-worthy, because even as he uttered those words, privately, Blair was persuading one of the poorest countries in Africa, Tanzania, to spend £28 million on BAE's military air traffic control system. Tanzania had no operational air force. Smelling corruption, one of Blair's ministers confronted her boss.
In the case of Tanzania, it couldn't afford this, and I was planning some tens of millions aid to pay for a big move to universal primary education. So if they went ahead with it, we were going to use British aid, that, in effect, to pay for this wretched, old-fashioned, useless air traffic control system. And I thought there must be corruption here. So it was a disgusting, disgraceful project, and Tony thought I was making a fuss about nothing.
But Blair was about to help BAE in a much bigger way, and not only them. The company had long been accused of corruption around the huge arms contract they signed with Saudi Arabia under Mrs. Thatcher. Called Al Yamama, the deal was worth over $40 billion. Dick Evans, at the time BAE's man in Saudi Arabia, had gone as far as eating sheep's eyeballs to drive the deal through.
Those of us who have examined Al Yamama are fond of remembering the phrase that was, bruited about at the time the deal was cut. You know, the biggest sale of anything by anyone to anybody ever. I mean, we are talking amazingly large amounts of money here. It's a matter of public record that there were vast amounts of sweeteners involved in this deal.
A close family friend of George W. Bush, the Saudi Prince Bandar alone was accused of trousering $2 billion. Blair blocked the publication of a parliamentary report on the deal, but the Serious Fraud Office uncovered damage.